Imagine a world where cars fuel themselves. No gas stations, no charging plugs, no waiting hours for a recharge. Now imagine the technology that could make this possible being sold not to the United States, but to China in a deal worth $1 trillion. This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now, and it's shaking the global auto industry to its core. Deep in Africa, an innovation has emerged that could forever rewrite the rules of transportation: the self-powered electric vehicle. Unlike traditional EVs that depend on external charging infrastructure, these cars generate their own power, redefining what we thought possible in clean energy mobility. But here's the twist. While American automakers debated, hesitated, and lobbied for subsidies, China moved first. Beijing has just announced a jaw-dropping $1 trillion investment to secure this African breakthrough. The move isn't just about cars. It's about power, control, and the future of global transportation. Why would China commit such an astronomical sum? Because self-powered EVs don't just eliminate fossil fuels. They could dismantle the charging infrastructure industry, disrupt oil economies, and catapult whichever nation controls the tech into unrivaled dominance. For China, already the world's largest EV producer, this could mean checkmate against the United States. Meanwhile, in Washington, policymakers are scrambling. America, once the leader in automotive innovation, now finds itself playing catch-up in a race it didn't even realize had already started. Could this be the moment the U.S. permanently loses its edge in the global EV war? This isn't just about cars. It's about geopolitics, resources, and influence. Africa, long seen as a resource hub, is now the birthplace of a world-changing innovation. And by backing it with $1 trillion, China isn't just buying cars, it's buying the future. So the question is, will America fight back? Or has China just secured the golden key to a new energy empire? What do you think? Will self-powered EVs really change the world? Or is this just another overhyped promise? Drop your thoughts and comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned as we uncover the next twist in the global EV revolution. But to understand why this deal is shaking the world, we need to go back to where it all began: Africa. For years, inventors across the continent have quietly experimented with technologies designed to solve one of Africa's biggest challenges: limited access to reliable electricity. Out of necessity came brilliance. The self-powered car, designed not just for convenience, but for survival in places where charging stations were rare or non-existent. One particular prototype stunned observers: a vehicle that could power itself endlessly, using a revolutionary system of energy capture and regeneration. It wasn't just an electric car. It was an energy ecosystem on wheels. Suddenly, Africa wasn't just a supplier of raw materials for the world's clean tech revolution. It was the source of the next industrial leap. China saw it early. The same way it had invested in Africa's rare earth minerals, roads, and 5G networks, Beijing recognized that this invention was far more valuable than gold or oil. In closed-door meetings, Chinese officials courted African innovators with promises of global expansion, research funding, and massive infrastructure support. And then came the announcement: a $1 trillion partnership deal. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. By locking down Africa's self-powered EV tech, China positioned itself not just as the leader of electric cars, but as the architect of a future where energy independence is the ultimate currency. The reaction worldwide? Pure shock. European automakers called it the death of the charging industry. Oil companies warned of catastrophic losses if the technology scaled. And in the U.S., automakers pushed back, dismissing the tech as unproven, even as whispers grew inside Washington that America had just been outmaneuvered in the biggest energy play of the century. But behind the scenes, things were far from over. American tech giants quietly began sending teams to Africa, desperate to secure licensing rights before China could tighten its grip. At the same time, whispers leaked of secret U.S. government talks with African leaders, offering billions in aid and military support in exchange for access to the technology. And so the stage is set. Africa, once overlooked, now holds a balance of global power in its hands. China has made its trillion-dollar move. The U.S. is scrambling to respond. And the rest of the world is watching, wondering who will control the future mobility. And will Africa choose loyalty, money, or independence? But Africa's choice was far from simple. On one hand, China's trillion-dollar investment promised factories, jobs, and rapid industrialization. On the other, America's sudden interest carried not just money, but political leverage, military backing, and the possibility of technology partnerships with Silicon Valley. Leaders across the continent found themselves under enormous pressure. Some argue that Africa should take China's offer and leap into the future with guaranteed funding. Others whisper that America's late arrival meant better bargaining power, a chance to play both sides and finally set the terms, instead of being dictated to. At the heart of it all was the African inventor whose vision sparked this revolution. Until now, he had worked in obscurity, facing ridicule, lack of funding, and even accusations of fraud. But with China and the U.S. circling, his creation was no longer a dream. It was a global prize. And yet, he feared what would happen if his technology was monopolized. Would it truly free the world from oil dependency, or simply create a new kind of empire controlled by foreign powers? The race for the self-powered EV quickly spilled into global politics. In Beijing, state media declared China's deal as proof of its unstoppable rise. In Washington, lawmakers accused Africa of selling out to a rival superpower. And in Europe, automakers began lobbying their governments to intervene, warning that the entire continent's car industry was at risk of collapse. But Africa's streets told a different story. Ordinary citizens, once ignored in the global EV revolution, suddenly became proud owners of cars that ran without fuel or charging. For them, it wasn't about geopolitics. It was about freedom, the freedom to drive, travel, and live without being tethered to an electric grid that barely worked. But then, just as China celebrated its trillion-dollar victory, a secret leak shook the world. Rumors spread that the technology contained a hidden flaw, something so dangerous it could either derail the deal entirely or plunge the world into a new kind of energy crisis. Was this leak planted by U.S. intelligence to sabotage China's move? Or was there truly a risk hidden deep inside the invention that no one wanted to talk about? Within days of the leak, whispers turned into headlines. Reports claimed the self-powered EV's revolutionary energy system relied on a material so rare and so unstable that it could become the new oil. If true, this meant whoever controlled the supply of that material would control the future of transportation. Some scientists warned of possible radiation risks. Others claimed the flaw was exaggerated to scare investors. But one thing was certain: the technology wasn't as untouchable as it first appeared. This technology works, but at a cost the world is not ready to pay. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could enslave nations rather than free them. The confession spread like wildfire. In Europe, newspapers asked whether the self-powered EV was truly a blessing or just another weapon of control. In Africa, outrage boiled over. Protesters demanded to know, had their own people betrayed them or had they been manipulated by foreign agents? Meanwhile, China tightened its grip. Security around the inventor's lab was increased. Contracts were rewritten in secret, and whispers spread that Beijing might even send military advisors to protect its investment. In Washington, the leak was treated as an opportunity. Officials pushed for sanctions against Chinese-African trade deals, claiming safety concerns. But behind closed doors, American corporations began aggressively courting the whistleblower, hoping to buy not just his silence, but his knowledge. The game had changed. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about who controlled the truth. Inside Africa, divisions grew. Some leaders wanted to continue with China at all costs, seeing the $1 trillion deal as the fastest path to prosperity. Others began questioning whether Africa should finally stand alone, refusing both Chinese money and American influence. The inventor, once hailed as a hero, now found himself a prisoner of geopolitics. His creation was no longer just an innovation. It was a battlefield. But then, something even more alarming surfaced. Reports indicated that China had already begun mass-producing a prototype fleet of the self-powered EVs. Despite the alleged flaw, cargo ships loaded with vehicles were spotted, leaving African ports under heavy guard. If the flaw was real, millions of drivers could soon be at risk. If it wasn't, then China had just pulled off the greatest power grab of the century. And now the world waits. Will China unleash its fleet and prove the skeptics wrong? Will America sabotage the rollout before it hits the streets? And will Africa's inventor ever regain control of the dream he created? Or has his vision already been stolen? As the clock ticked down, the world was on edge. Satellite images tracked the massive Chinese cargo ships as they crossed the Indian Ocean, escorted by naval destroyers. Social media lit up with speculation. Would these vehicles mark the dawn of a new age or the beginning of a global crisis? In Washington, emergency meetings stretched late into the night. Intelligence reports hinted that sabotage teams were already being prepared, ready to intercept or disable the shipment before it could reach Chinese soil. Meanwhile, European leaders debated sanctions, fearing that once China deployed its fleet, Europe's automakers would be finished. But on the African streets, the atmosphere was different. For many citizens, the ship symbolized pride. Africa was no longer just a supplier of minerals or labor. It was delivering finished technology to the world. Crowds gathered in coastal cities, cheering as the ships departed, waving flags and chanting the inventor's name. Yet, not everyone was celebrating. Protesters, waving banners that read, "Africa for Africans," demanded that the technology should never have left the continent. They accused their leaders of selling the future to China, calling it a modern-day colonization hidden behind trillion-dollar contracts. Meanwhile, hidden away from the chaos, the inventor worked in silence. Unknown to both China and the U.S., he had embedded a fail-safe mechanism into the core of the technology, a code that could remotely disable the vehicles if they were ever misused. He had never intended to use it. But now, as the world spiraled toward conflict, the question haunted him. Should he let the shipments reach China untouched, or should he trigger the failsafe and risk everything collapsing, including Africa's chance at prosperity? Unbeknownst to him, both China and the U.S. suspected the existence of this hidden key. Spy networks scrambled to locate it. Hackers launched digital attacks, searching for weaknesses, and rumors spread that one African intelligence agency had already stolen a fragment of the code and was secretly negotiating to sell it to the highest bidder. Finally, the moment arrived. The first cargo ship neared Shanghai's harbor. Cameras from around the world broadcasted live as cranes prepared to unload the futuristic vehicles. Crowds gathered along the coastline. Chinese officials smiled confidently, declaring it the start of a new age. But at that very second, thousands of miles away, the inventor stared at a glowing laptop screen. On it, a single button flashed, "Activate Override." We will not allow Africa's future to be sold. If China, America, or Europe believe they can own our innovation, they are mistaken. Either the world recognizes Africa as an equal partner, or the system shuts down. The speech ignited firestorms. Some Africans hailed them as heroes. Others called them traitors. But the message was clear. Africa's destiny would no longer be dictated by outsiders. Back in his lab, the inventor discovered something shocking. Buried in the stolen override code was a weakness, a digital backdoor only he could access. He had one chance to seize control, but it meant embedding his own biometric signature into the system. If it failed, he would die with his invention. As the clock hit 1 minute and 30 seconds, he made his choice. Fingers flew across the keyboard. His heartbeat matched the timer. 60 seconds, 30 seconds, 10 seconds. Then silence. The screen blinked once, twice, and then a new message appeared. Override neutralized. System secured. In Shanghai, the cars roared to life flawlessly before thousands of cheering spectators. China declared victory. America fumed. Europe watched in disbelief. But the truth was hidden. The inventor had quietly rewritten the code, placing control not in the hands of rebels, China, or America, but in Africa itself. Every self-powered EV on Earth now carried a digital key tied to his homeland. No shipment could run without Africa's approval. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted. No longer could superpowers treat Africa as a pawn. The continent had become the gatekeeper of the world's most revolutionary technology. China still had its trillion-dollar deal, but now it depended on Africa's cooperation. America, though outmaneuvered, was forced to negotiate, and the rebels, realizing the inventor had beaten them, vanished back into the shadows. Months later, in a historic summit, African leaders announced a bold decision. The self-powered EV would not belong to one nation or one corporation. It would belong to Africa as a collective. The technology would be licensed globally, but under terms set by Africans themselves. For the first time in modern history, the continent was not just a supplier of resources, but the architect of a global revolution. As the first fleets rolled across Africa's highways, powered endlessly without charging or fuel, the world understood what happened. China may have moved first. America may have tried to sabotage. But in the end, it was Africa and the dream of one determined inventor. That shook the world. Screen fades to black. A single line appears. The future no longer belongs to those who buy it, but to those who create it.